In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Friends, during the recent fire incident in America, an event unfolded at a hospital that American authorities have been desperately trying to conceal. While treating patients during the blaze at an American hospital, 5 doctors converted to Islam, and these doctors were none other than professionals who, in religious terms, were Jews. An extraordinary incident occurred in the hospital when these 5 doctors of the Jewish faith embraced Islam. To learn the full details, please watch the entire video. And if you're new to our channel, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update on our new videos. Friends, in recent days, the widespread fire in America has wreaked havoc everywhere. The massive blaze has claimed countless human lives, and many others remain caught in the struggle between life and death. In the parts of America that were spared from the fire, a huge crowd of injured people gathered, with many being rushed there with severe wounds. In the hospital, doctors were tirelessly treating the injured and working to bring them back to life. Yet some patients were so gravely hurt that, even with every available treatment, they ultimately passed away. It was an ordinary day when 5 Jewish doctors on duty, exhausted from fatigue, sat down briefly to rest. They all had determined faces, with deep, dark eyes and large, unkempt beards. Even though they were on duty, they wore flat caps. Their features betrayed the zeal of their own religious backgrounds. Yet they were unaware that their lives were about to take a dramatic turn. At that time in the hospital, every incoming patient was not formally identified. Instead, the injured were admitted without proper identification or paperwork because the emergency situation left no time for formalities. Under such conditions, it was nearly impossible to discern who was rich or poor, which patient belonged to which sect or religion, or who held any particular status. At that moment, everyone was receiving exactly the same treatment. After seeing off all the patients, these doctors resumed their duties with renewed vigor as a large number of patients were again being brought into the hospital. Beds in the emergency room started to run short. In fact, the entire hospital functioned as a burn unit at that time. This time, a very large group of patients was brought in, all in extremely critical condition with their bodies badly burned. Suddenly, the doctor's attention turned towards a young man who seemed to be in the most desperate condition, so they began his treatment first. The young man's condition was pitiable. Although he was clearly suffering, he mumbled quietly instead of shouting or screaming like the other patients. He was taken into the burn unit, and the doctors closed the door for a while. However, when they emerged, an unusual look of terror was unmistakable on their faces. Whereas before they had carried out their task with determined focus, now their expressions had changed. They were still caring attentively for the patients, yet their faces no longer betrayed their earlier resolve. They looked extremely anxious, sometimes glancing at one another and exchanging silent signals as their hands began to tremble. Noticing their extreme fatigue and changed demeanor, the hospital administration decided to relieve them of duty and asked them to return the next day, well rested. Without uttering a word, they silently headed home. Though even as they departed, they exchanged looks as if silently sharing a deep secret. There was a clear, unspoken warning in everyone's eyes. The next day, all 5 doctors did not report for duty, and even the day after that, they were absent from the hospital. These were highly accomplished doctors who, beyond their regular hours, had dedicated countless extra hours to humanitarian service. Yet at such a crucial moment, they were missing, not coming in even though it was their scheduled time. Concerned, the hospital staff contacted them, and the 5 doctors assured them that they would return the following day. As each doctor entered the hospital at his designated time, he noticed that people were staring at him intently, as if they wished to ask something but couldn't voice their questions. The onlookers' eyes reflected pure astonishment. When the 5 gathered in the duty room, they looked at one another in disbelief. Each face bore the marks of shock, yet there was also gratitude and a deep sense of contentment in their eyes. Their appearances had changed somewhat from the previous day. Their beards, once unkempt, were now neatly trimmed in a distinctive style, and even the caps on their heads were entirely different. There was a unique, almost divine radiance on their faces, and what shocked everyone the most was that they were now holding rosaries, tasbih, in their hands. They appeared as true Muslims. What startled the people even more was that these 5 doctors had previously been very sensitive about their own faith. They would not even set foot in a ward with a single Muslim patient. Before treating a patient, they would review the patient's entire record. Yet now, despite their earlier prejudice, here they were, in unmistakably Muslim appearance, a fact that left everyone truly astonished. During the emergency, everyone was as surprised by this sudden transformation as they would be in any normal situation. The 5 doctors smiled, embraced one another, congratulated each other, and resumed caring for their patients. However, they eagerly awaited their break when they could finally discuss the events in detail. As the rush of patients subsided a bit, the 5 exchanged glances and silently signaled, then proceeded toward the room of the young man whose case had so profoundly changed their lives. Little did they know that when they reached his room, yet another shock awaited them. As soon as they stepped into the room, their eyes widened in disbelief. On the bed where they had laid the young man, he was no longer there. Instead, someone else was lying in his place. They immediately went to check the patient's records and discovered that the patient, who had been brought in on that fateful evening when they left duty, was still registered, but the young man they remembered was nowhere to be found. They quickly checked the computer records and learned that the young man had passed away. His body had been moved to the morgue in the hospital's basement. None of his next of kin had yet come forward to claim him. Tears welled up in everyone's eyes. The young man, because of whom they had found their true calling, was no longer in this world. Though the doctors had wanted to do so much for him, fate had not granted that opportunity. They had recited Fatiha for him and prayed sincerely for his forgiveness. They could repay the debt of his favor only if, in front of everyone, they publicly declared their acceptance of Islam. Thus, they arranged a press conference and openly announced their conversion to Islam, recounting the young man's story and explaining how a miracle from Allah had drawn them to the faith. They still remembered the day when the young man was brought to the hospital. Rather than lamenting his injuries in agony, he had quietly lain on the stretcher, waiting for his turn. When they began his treatment, they noticed that his tongue recited various verses from the Quran, an indication that he was a Muslim. Yet there was something about him so compelling that he did not even interfere with his own treatment. Instead, he lay there peacefully, eyes closed, silently reciting tasbih. There was an unusual magnetism in his eyes and a radiant glow on his face. A faint blue light emanated from his forehead, within which the word Allah could be distinctly seen. This miracle overwhelmed the doctors, and they quickly ended their duty and hurried home. Yet before leaving, they did not admonish one another to remain steadfast in their old beliefs, although deep inside, they were all shaken. Within 2 days, they had thoroughly researched Islam and then embraced it wholeheartedly. They had become Muslims solely because of this young man. They had wished to come forward and share this joyous news, but circumstances had not allowed it at that moment. Now they were determined to spread the message of La ilaha, there is no God, that was so manifest on the young man's tongue. They began inviting the public to embrace Islam openly. When the young man's body was taken out of the morgue, the sight of his face, which had been the catalyst for such a miraculous transformation that even the most devout Jews had embraced Islam, left everyone utterly astonished. Every eye widened in wonder. His face bore a distinctly divine smile. No one looking at him after such a painful demise could say that he had left this transient world in anguish. The young man's patience, perseverance, and unwavering trust in Allah had moved the doctors so profoundly that they too began to reflect deeply on Islam. On the advice of the 5 doctors, on that very day countless people vowed to research Islam, and if their hearts were convinced, they would embrace it. And truly, whoever earnestly seeks the truth in Islam is bound to find the true religion.